5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Gosh, this is going to be an interesting interview. We have here in Ocala a Veterans Park, and in that Veterans Park, there's a tall statue. It's actually a tall pedestal, and on the pedestal is a statue of a soldier, and the soldier represents the Confederate Army, and affectionately, the statue is known as Johnny Reb. I don't know if it actually says that on the statue. Do you know?
I don't know.
But it's a very controversial statue because some people think it should not be there. Mm-hmm. Some people think it should be there. I look at it and I think, okay, I don't know who that guy is up there, who that represents, but let's just try to imagine what it must have been like for that young man back in 1860, 1 year before the American Civil War started. What was that like? I mean, today, you know what's going on in the government. You know what's going on in the world. I mean, the news is at your fingertips. I mean, back then, 1 year before the Civil War, did they even have any clue that the North and the South, the two parts of this country, were about to fight each other? Yeah. And I think what is described by historians as one of the bloodiest wars in history, all history, I think. I could be wrong about that. Gilbert Hahn is on the phone. I can't wait to hear him talk about this. He's written a book called 404, America in 1860, the very year that you would think about it when you try to think about the people at that time. Mr. Hahn is an attorney and historian. He demonstrates and explains the operation of 19th century industrial equipment at the Hagley Museum. That's cool.
That is cool.
And there they preserve the original DuPont gunpowder factory in Wilmington, Delaware. Wow, 404. Okay, we're all ears from this point forward. And by the way, I know we have a lot of strong opinions in this listening audience about the Civil War, but I encourage you to call, but just hang in a little bit. Don't call right from the get-go, because I want to ask Gilbert Hahn a lot of things. Good morning, Gilbert. Thank you for being on the air with us today.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you.
And where are you right now?
In Wilmington, Delaware.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the air with us today. Yeah, we have a statue. I'm sure this is common throughout the South, that it's very controversial. Am I right? That's right?
Oh, yes, indeed. Quite.
Well, I mean, when I was asking, am I right, is it controversial everywhere, or does no community have a Confederate soldier statue that is not controversial?
Well, most of the northern states have a northern soldier statue, and they're revering their dead the same way that the southern states revere theirs.
Yeah, it makes sense. But the argument that happens a lot is that it wasn't about slavery; it was about states' rights.
The precipitating cause of the Civil War was the election of a Republican as President of the United States. And the reason that the Deep South, states of the Deep South seceded was that they believed ultimately that the power of the federal government would interfere with their domestic institutions, for which you may understand slavery. Slavery was the actual root cause of the Civil War, but it was essentially a political fight, and the reason stems in large part from racial attitudes of the day. As the war began, it is very unlikely that the northern population would have fought a war to end slavery, but they certainly would. When the Southern Confederate armies fired upon Fort Sumter, there was a great unification of Northern opinion about the need to protect and defend the Union under the Constitution.
Interesting way of saying that. So, are we better off because of it? And there's so many things I want to ask you about this, but I guess. When it's all said and done, in spite of the fact that so many people died, is it right that that's the bloodiest war in history or in American history?
That's my understanding. And it's the casualty lists are measured in hundreds of thousands, not only from bullets on the battlefield, but from infection from those bullets and from disease that swept through armies on both sides.
So is the book centered on the precursors to the Civil War, or is it about something different?
It's about the year 1860, but it does look back to trace the political history of the United States, political history, the geographic growth of the United States, and also the changes in the country with respect to the institution of slavery. One of the things we forget today is that when the Constitution, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, when the Constitution was ratified, slavery was a lawful institution all across the country, North and South, and it's only really by the year 1830 that you have the working out of the programs of gradual abolition in the North that reduced the slave populations. One of the things that surprised me when I started to work on the book is that in looking at the census of 1860, there's still, in 1860, a residual slave population in the state of New Jersey.
Is that right?
Oh, my.
So if... Okay, I love the fact that you explained the North's passion of just preserving the Union. But the fact that they were only 30 years out at the most from having been slave owners themselves means that they kind of maybe could relate to owning slaves, even though they didn't have it anymore up there. Or were they? Was it a different time? Would 30 years back then seem like right now? 30 years doesn't seem like much to me, but
I think that's right. On the other hand, you had a difference in the social context, the social the society in which people lived at the time. In the South, where you have large slave populations, you have people living with a continual threat of slave revolts. By the 1830s, slave populations in the North have reduced to such an extent that is no longer a part of their daily concern, and it makes a huge difference in my mind about how people live their daily life. There's a much greater awareness of slavery when you have it at hand, and although 30 years, historically speaking, is a blink in time, that is the time for a generation to pass. So you have a generation having grown up without the experience of large slave populations.
Can you try to get me inside the head of that guy that's represented on that statue? Was he aware of what was going on? Was he simply being loyal to this new Confederate States of America, or was he actually I don't know if manipulated is the word, but was he fighting for what he believed was not about slavery, but the right for a state to decide for itself what it should do? And in this case, it would have been have slaves or not. So was he told by those who, when you try to persuade an army of men to go kill other men who used to be part of the same country, you have to have something in their mind that justifies what they're doing.
I think that's absolutely right. Only about 25% of the people in the southern states were slave owners, and a very small proportion of them were actually owned large numbers of slaves. But those people who owned large numbers, whom we refer to as the planter class, really dominated the society politically and intellectually, and they, I believe, were effective in persuading the bulk of the Southern population that their interests really resided in maintaining slavery. You have to understand that the Southern states grew about 80% of the cotton that the world consumed at the time. It was a huge business of making cloth. And when we talk about white gold, there's no question about it. Cotton represented roughly 50% of the export value of products sent out internationally from the United States.
Wow.
Wow.
So there's a huge economic interest being driven there, and there's historically, from the time of the formation of the Republican Party, there grew up, or there became more strident, a Southern nationalist movement that were interested in creating Southern independence. They managed to persuade most of the people in the South that their rights as individuals would be imperiled if there was a Republican president. Now, the mechanism then is the 1860 election. Elections, as we understand, are stir up the emotions of a population, and you can see that happen to an extraordinary degree because the Republicans are strong in the North. They're barely present in the Upper South, and they weren't even existent as a party in the Lower South. So you have a population that can't even vote against Lincoln. But they understand, given the mechanism of the Electoral College, that the northern states have enough political power to elect a Republican president, even though they can't vote against him.
Wow. So if I went to, let's say, a historical place, like here in Florida, we have a lot of sugar plantations that are, that are historical.
Yeah.
So if I went to a historical sugar plantation with a black friend, and I'm looking at the quaint stuff, and I would make a comment like, "Oh my goodness, wouldn't it have been great to live in those times?" I'm guessing he would say, "Nah, for me, it wouldn't have been good."
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if we look back at that and like we say, "Oh, wouldn't that be nice to live the simpler life?" It was not great for them, was it?
It's certainly not for the black population. There is a great diversity in the living experience of the time. We do think about the planter family living in the archetypal mansion with the pillars out front, with their household slaves, who to an extent are treated as household familiars. But then there's a very, very different experience out in the fields. People black people worked in gangs under the threat of the lash. Given some privileges, given some relaxation, but it's really a life of unremitting labor. And put yourself in that position, you'd find yourself very unhappy, given the way that we've all grown up and have become accustomed to our everyday civil liberties.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. The book is called Fourscore and Four: America in 1860. Gilbert Hahn is the author, and your questions and your calls are invited. If you want to call in, 622-9622. We do have to take a little break, Gilbert, for the weather and a couple of commercial spots, but we'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Sunshine today with a high of 64 to 68, then clear and chilly tonight. Those ranging from the upper 30s in a few inland spots to 45 along the coast. Tomorrow, mostly sunny and breezy with a high of 68 to 72. Then on Friday, mostly sunny and noticeably cooler with highs ranging from the mid-50s in the northernmost part of the zone to the low 60s in the south. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
Hi, this is JP from Penn Flooring here in Ocala. I would like to invite you to come in and visit our spacious showroom where we have solutions for every style and budget. From wall-to-wall carpet to hardwood floors and tiles, we have an unsurpassed selection of flooring. At Penn Flooring, we've provided quality customer service with a family touch for over 25 years. Visit our website at pennflooring.com or come by our showroom, 1201 Southwest 17th Street, just over the bridge. Penn Flooring, quality customer service with a family touch.
One of the most common questions those nearing retirement are asking, will I outlive my money? Retirement questions like these and many more will be answered every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on Planning for a Better and Safer Retirement with hosts Francois and Julian Cozenet. Francois and Julian will help you put your retirement puzzle together. Catch Planning for a Better and Safer Retirement Saturdays at 9 a.m. on Ocala's News Talk, The Source 96.3 FM and 1370 AM.
Got
a garden and we've got a show for you called You've Got a Garden with your host, Master Gardener Carol Ann Baldwin. Carol Ann answers your questions about your flowers, your veggies, your grass, your trees, even questions about your bugs. And she's only on WOCA, so don't miss Carol Ann Baldwin and You've Got a Garden each Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on WOCA The Source.
All right, 20 minutes after 10 o'clock. Let's see, when I was a kid, I think we celebrated Lincoln's birthday on February 12th.
Yes.
Is that right? And then 22nd was Washington's birthday, and then we've decided we have a President's Day, which now it's next Monday, right? The 16th?
Yeah.
Gilbert Hahn is on the phone. 404 is the title of his book. It's America in 1860. And Gilbert, we are getting some calls from listeners. Are you okay with taking calls?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, let's go to the phone. Thank you for calling and for waiting. You're on the air now with Gilbert Hahn.
This is really a privilege. Thank you. I'm a big student of the Civil War, and the election of 1860 has got to be one of the most fascinating presidential elections in American history, perhaps only rivaled in modern times by the 1968 election. But I was going to ask our author a question about Breckinridge. He was from Kentucky, and he was vice president of the United States before the Civil War, and he ran as a Southern Democrat against Lincoln in an election with multiple candidates, and he lost, obviously. And then he went with the South, and he became a Confederate general, and he was also in the Confederate cabinet. And it's just amazing to think that someone who had been vice president and one step away from the presidency would go with his state loyalty rather than his loyalty to the country as a whole. And I think that says a lot about how different things were back then. But I want to ask our author, what went through the mind of people like that? What a decision that would be, a heartbreaking decision to leave your friends behind and go south and join, try to start a brand new country. It must have been agonizing. So I'd like to hear something about that, and I'll listen on the radio. Thank you.
Thank you.
The caller is absolutely right. People's initial orientation, initial loyalties at the time were to their states. Breckinridge is an example. Robert E. Lee is another. He was offered command of the Union armies by General-in-Chief at the time, Winfield Scott, but decided to follow his state of Virginia to the Confederacy, despite years not educated at West Point and years serving as an officer in the United States Army. I've got to say that in 1860, people did think about their states more than they thought about their nation. I think we have come to think as much about our nation as our states, but it's still very much the case now as then that our politics are essentially statewide and local, and even the election of the president and vice president, which are the only truly national offices in our nation, those elections are conducted as so many state elections, and the national issues are filtered through the perspective of the state and local politics.
Wow, and what a different time it must have been, and just to try to imagine it, and to realize how different it actually was depending on your color. I mean, that is really something I don't think I've ever actually contemplated. I go to these historical sites and I say, gosh, wouldn't it have been cool to live like this? But not for everybody.
Yeah.
I think it would have been interesting to go back and visit. I happen to like modern medicine and hot and cold running water, and the convenience of electricity and central heating. But to be able to have visited back then and to have seen what conditions are like would I think is a revelation, and that's part of what led me to write the book. And the difference is very much a difference of color, because although there were large slave populations, there were also small free black populations, and even in the North, their range of freedoms were curtailed by laws, and there were attempts in some of the western states to prevent free black individuals from coming into the states.
I have a dumb question. I think it's a dumb one, and maybe insensitive, and I don't mean it to be either way. But when you hear about like Jefferson fathering children with with some of the slaves were women he had relationships with. Is that accurate that he had relationships? And I don't mean Jefferson specifically, but in general, the slave owners who were male having sex with their female slaves. Was it just because they were like being used as prostitutes, or did they really fall in love? What actually was happening?
I think there's a range of experience there. I had the occasion to visit Monticello last year, where a good friend of mine is a tour guide, and he gave a demonstration and lecture about just that subject. And apparently, Sally Hemings, who is the woman with whom Jefferson was involved romantically, was the offspring of the man who was the father of Jefferson's first wife. So there may well have been a strong visual similarity between the two women. And there is apparently genetic evidence that the Hemings family were descendants of Jefferson. You hear this about other places in the South, other plantations, and you hear. You have letters and diaries of white women living in plantations deploring the behavior of some of the men, and you also have mixed race children being raised and loved and obtaining reasonably important social positions within the South as a result of these liaisons. Now, some of them were loving, and undoubtedly some of them were strictly physical. But you do have a white population that has a black population in subjugation, and so it's an opportunity for what we today would see as abuse.
And women were highly involved in the political nature back then, even though they chose to remain invisible.
Well, the women had no vote in those days, but they certainly were learning to speak and express their opinion. There was an active, although I think at the time small, women's rights movement that were militating for change of laws to improve the lot of women and improve the and give women the vote, which in a Republican democratic society like ours is what people need in order to become relevant within the political system.
We have another phone call. Thank you for calling and for waiting. You're on the air with Gilbert Hahn.
Yes. During the Civil War, were there any foreign powers that were supporting or helping either the North or the South?
Good question.
The Confederate government made a deliberate effort to involve both Great Britain and France in the Civil War. And for a time, it looked as though they might be very successful. Ultimately, the British, who were quick to declare their neutrality as between the two belligerent powers, the Confederates and the Federals, maintained their neutrality. One of the more interesting international aspects, though, of the Civil War is that during the Civil War, the British and French, and together with Spain, invaded Mexico. Mexico had fallen behind on payment of its international debt, and the Civil War in the United States, having involved the United States so much, those foreign powers invaded Mexico, and France took the opportunity to try to put an emperor on the throne of Mexico.
The book is called Fourscore and Four Gilbert. We're out of time. Where do we get the book?
On Amazon.com as either an ebook or a paperback.
Okay, and you have a website as well, Fourscore and Four?
Fourscore and Four Blogspot, and I'm on Twitter and Google and Facebook as well.
Wow, we didn't have anywhere near enough time to pick your brain some more, but thank you so much for being on the air with us and answering our questions, Gilbert.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a little break and be right back.
Trial kicking off today in Texas for the ex-Marine charged with killing the man immortalized in American Sniper.
A jury of 10 women and 2 men will now listen to the story of Eddie Ray Routh. It was his family who contacted Chris Kyle of American Sniper fame for help. Kyle and comrade Chad Littlefield had taken Routh shooting when Routh turned the firearms on them. Routh's attorney will claim his mental condition made him insane.
Fox Radio's Evan Brown and